Anna Paulina Luna. Congresswoman, great to see you. Your reaction to these sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil. Listening to the president just a short while ago, he simply said you have conversations with Putin that then don't go anywhere. And it just sounds like the president and all the people in his administration are just tired of just the talk and the no walk in terms of ending this war.
Well, I'd like to be the first to say that President Trump, as you know, is very fair. And part of the reason why he's been so effective at these other negotiations, you know, the 8 other previously that resulted in peace deals, is ultimately because of the fact that, A, he's very firm, very respected, but also, 2, he knows how to cut a deal. And I think that, you know, the president's same sentence also said that he was not going to be giving any of the Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine because he didn't want to escalate the war. And so he's being very firm in his position. What I will say is that the president is actively engaged in talks and has always had a good relationship, a respectful relationship with the president of Russia. In the same sense, Kirill Dmitriev, who's Russia's special envoy to the United States in regards to some of these peace talks, has also extended, you know, open communication and has maintained a very good relationship with Steve Wynkoff. So there's a lot that happens behind closed doors. You know, generals will always talk to generals that the American people might not see. But what I will say is that I have faith that the president will indeed secure a peace deal. And I think that this is all part of that. Remember, President Trump has also vocally said that if Russia does agree to a peace deal, that he would consider trade. I think trade could be a great option for Russia and an incentive for them to end the war in Ukraine.
You know, Congresswoman, what about these sanctions specifically, though? Are they enough to get Putin to the negotiating table in a meaningful way?
Look, I'm not President Putin, but I think anytime sanctions are levied, I think that it definitely does send a message. And I think that ultimately it does also to have great negative impacts as well. And so I think that the president knows what he's doing. But again, the fact that the president is not going to send missiles is actually a good thing because we don't want to escalate the war. And so I think that anytime there's a negotiation, you always have to give someone an off-ramp. And the president's very firm. He wants to see the fighting stop. He wants to save lives. And I think that he's going to be very successful. In fact, I'm so positive of it that I've also joined, Hillary Clinton in saying that he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize in addition to all the other peace deals he's been able to negotiate. So I'm very faithful that he'll be able to secure this one.
Congresswoman, the European Union countries just approved the 19th package of sanctions against Russia for its war against Ukraine. And with these latest sanctions just on the 2 largest oil companies, it's slow going in terms of financial impact. Do you think the president and the administration would be willing, if Putin doesn't step up and actually do something and come to the table in a more meaningful way, something more significant like secondary sanctions? Larry Kudlow has talked about where you just completely cut off the ability for other nations or businesses to transact business. You cut them off from the SWIFT messaging system. You cut them off from the FedWire. You essentially cannot do business with Russian entities. Does it require that?
I don't think that it's going to get to that point. And the reason I say that is because what you're seeing with the 2 administrations, both the Biden and the Trump administration, under Biden, I don't think that these talks were even taking place. With Trump, they are. And you do see a certain level of respect and rapport that's actually de-escalating the situation. So I don't want to speak on behalf of the White House and the administration, but I do think that they are very serious about this. Now, on the flip side, I'd also like to point out there that it does seem that the people of Russia and that the president of Russia do indeed want to maintain relations with the United States. And they also would like to see maybe potentially access to our markets in regards to trade. So in the event that there is a peace deal, which I think there will be, and remember, President Trump is not likely going to be doing another meeting until he can get that as a secured win. And you heard him in that statement that you played earlier that he said, you know, we're not quite where we're at yet. But ultimately, I do think that this is on the horizons. And so I'm going to continue to support the president in this. And I'd also like to say that, you know, President Putin himself said that if President Trump was in office, this would not happen. The European Union, I've actually spent significant time talking to some of the members of the EU, and there are some that are war hawks, but there's also some that don't share the interventionist perspective and actually want to maintain peace and get back to, a normal way of living instead of funding these foreign wars. And so there's a split there, but ultimately President Trump is leading not just this nation, but the world in regard to how he's going to respond to this. And so I'm very happy that we have him in office because he's definitely peace first and foremost.
And we'll definitely keep an eye on it. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate you.
Thank you.